The Manhattan penthouse overlooked the entire city like a throne room overlooking a kingdom of peasants. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across 3 sides, the kind that cost more than most people's houses. Everything was carefully curated. Everything was perfect. This was the home of Marcus Hartley. He'd built Knight Industries from absolute nothing, started coding in his parents' garage in Queens, bootstrapped a company with nothing but intelligence and work ethic, turning it into a $15 billion valuation, a name that appeared in business magazines next to visionary and genius. But success, Marcus had learned, wasn't something you lived with. It was something that lived inside you, consuming everything else. By 32, Marcus had forgotten what it felt like to want anything other than the next achievement. Money became abstract. It was about keeping score, about proving he'd won. And then he got married. Enter Camilla. She fit the penthouse the way a painting fits a museum wall, beautiful in that calculated way that takes real work to maintain. Blonde hair that cost $300 every 6 weeks, skin professionally maintained since 18. Designer clothes like they'd been painted on her body, the kind of smile that made people lean closer without knowing why. From the outside, their marriage looked like what winning looked like. Camilla came from old money, the kind of family where wealth accumulated over generations. She'd been groomed since childhood to be the perfect wife for a powerful man. She knew which wines to order. She knew how to host dinner parties that impressed without appearing to try. She knew how to stand next to her husband and look proud without overshadowing him. Marcus had chosen her for exactly these reasons. He'd chosen her based on how well she fit his image of success. She wasn't a partner. She was an accessory. A very expensive, very beautiful accessory. They'd met in a charity gala, the kind of event where rich people gathered to congratulate themselves for giving money to poor people. Camilla had been standing near the champagne station, and Marcus had approached her with the confidence of someone who'd never been rejected. She'd smiled at him, and he'd been immediately certain that she was the sort of woman who'd make him look better. He was right. She did. But here's what nobody tells you about perfection. It's a prison. A beautiful, luxurious, air-conditioned prison, but a prison nonetheless. Camilla spent her days doing what women like her are supposed to do. Charity galas where she smiled and networked. Instagram photos that looked effortless but took 47 takes to get right. Charity lunches where women maintained the fiction that they were best friends. She was Mrs. Hartley. She was ornamental. She was useful for Marcus's image, his brand, his persona as a man who had everything figured out. She was also slowly suffocating. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to the Hartley brand. Everything communicated something about Marcus's wealth, taste, and success. Nothing communicated anything about Camilla, except that she was the kind of woman who belonged in such a space. At night, she'd lie in bed next to Marcus, who was usually asleep before his head hit the pillow, exhausted from building his empire, and she'd wonder what it would feel like to be seen. Not as a wife. Not as an accessory, just as a person. Then, 5 years into their marriage, something changed. His name was Viktor Sokolov. Viktor was Marcus's legal counsel, the guy who handled complicated problems, lawsuits that needed to disappear quietly, business arrangements in gray areas where the law was more suggestion than mandate. He was tall in that European way, sophisticated in a way that made American men look crude by comparison. He had the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Viktor came to the penthouse frequently. Business meetings that went late into the evening, strategy sessions that needed privacy, dinners where the wine kept flowing and conversation grew heavier. The kind of gatherings where Camilla would serve drinks and listen and play her role. Except one night, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a glance across the dinner table that lasted a second too long, a comment from Viktor about how well she looked that night. Something Marcus would never say, something that acknowledged her as a person rather than as an extension of his success. A hand on her arm when he was making a point that lingered just past professional. Camilla felt it like an electric charge. She told herself it meant nothing. It was just attraction. Everyone has moments of attraction to people they shouldn't. It passes. You ignore it. You move on. That's what she told herself. But attraction, once acknowledged, doesn't go away. It sits in your chest and grows roots. It becomes a constant awareness of the sound of his voice, of the way he moved through space, of the fact that when he was in the penthouse, the air felt somehow more oxygenated, like she could finally breathe. Victor was different from Marcus. Where Marcus was aggressive intelligence and relentless drive, Victor had elegant thoughtfulness. He asked her questions about herself. What did she enjoy doing? What had she wanted to be before she became Mrs. Hartley? He listened like her answers mattered, like she was a person whose thoughts had actual significance. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. And then Marcus had to leave for London for a week on business. "I'll be back Thursday," Marcus said Monday morning, already in his suit, mentally checked out. "Hold down the fort. Don't throw any parties." He meant it as a joke, but there was an edge to it. Camilla kissed him on the cheek. "Have a safe flight." She watched him leave, watched his car pull away from the building, and then she stood alone in the penthouse. This beautiful, perfect, utterly sterile space, and she understood that she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't pretend to be happy while slowly disappearing. She waited exactly 48 hours. She called Victor on Wednesday morning. "I need to go over some things regarding the European expansion. Can you come by the penthouse this evening?" Victor was silent for a beat. Long enough that Camilla thought maybe he'd say no. Long enough that she thought maybe she'd misread everything. "Yes," Victor said finally, "I can do that." That single word contained an entire conversation. It contained acknowledgement. It contained agreement. It contained the understanding that this was no longer just attraction. This was a choice. Victor showed up at 7 o'clock that evening. He looked different than at business meetings, less formal, more human. He was wearing a soft sweater instead of a suit. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd come from the gym. He looked like a person instead of a position. They stood in the living room of the penthouse, the city glittering below them, like a promise. "We should talk about why you really called me," Victor said. Camilla's heart was moving so fast she thought it might break through her ribs. She was terrified. She was exhilarated. She was doing something that was going to wreck her entire life, and she was going to do it anyway. "I shouldn't have," she said. "This is insane." "Yes," Victor agreed, "completely insane." "We shouldn't," Camilla said. "No," Victor agreed, "we really shouldn't." They did anyway. It happened in the guest house, a smaller structure at the back of the property, where it was somehow less like a betrayal. Guest bedrooms that smelled like expensive linens and climate control. It was the kind of space designed for visitors, which made it feel somehow separate from real life. It wasn't their bed. That's the lie they told themselves anyway. But the lie was already dissolving the moment Victor's hands touched her face. The moment he kissed her with genuine attention instead of the distracted affection she was used to. The moment she felt, for the first time in years, like someone actually wanted her. Not as a status symbol, not as proof of success, just her. It was the most selfish, destructive, thrilling thing Camilla had ever experienced. After that first time, there was no going back. Once you cross that line, once you actually do the thing you've been thinking about doing, the nature of the temptation changes. It becomes less about the fantasy and more about the reality. Less about wondering and more about wanting. They saw each other every time Victor came to the house, which was often. Sometimes it was planned. Camilla would make sure she was home, would wear clothes that made Victor's eyes darken. Sometimes it was spontaneous. Victor arriving for a meeting with Marcus, staying late for reasons unrelated to business, both of them knowing exactly what they were risking. That one afternoon when they did it in Marcus's own office, his actual office, with his desk, while he was in a board meeting downstairs. That should have been when they both realized how far gone they were. That should have been the wake-up call. Instead, it just made them bolder, more reckless, more certain they could keep getting away with it. The affair became less about the sexual element and more about the emotional one. Victor would listen to Camilla talk about her life, and he would actually respond. He would remember things she'd said weeks earlier. He would ask follow-up questions. He treated her like her thoughts and feelings mattered. It was dangerous. It was intoxicating. Camilla told herself she was being careful, discreet. She varied the times and places. She deleted messages immediately after reading them. She kept the affair completely separate from her regular life, wore different perfume on days she knew Victor was coming, showered afterward, erased every physical trace of what had happened. She didn't know that somebody was watching. Her name was Sophie Chen. She'd worked for the Hartleys for 3 years, coming in 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, keeping the penthouse running like a perfectly oiled machine. She was the kind of employee that rich people don't really see, which was the whole point of her job. You're supposed to be invisible. You're supposed to fade into the background like your furniture. Sophie had learned invisibility the way other people learned languages. It was a skill that she'd developed out of necessity. Growing up in a working-class family in Queens, she'd learned that the less attention you drew to yourself, the safer you were, the less trouble you got into, the more you could observe the world without being observed yourself. She was extremely good at being invisible. She knew exactly how to move through the apartment without drawing attention. She understood the rhythm of the Hartleys' lives. She could read the emotional temperature of a room just by walking into it. She could sense tension the way animals sense storms. That's how she noticed things that other people might have missed. The way Camilla's demeanor changed on days when Victor was scheduled to visit. The way she'd spend extra time on her hair and makeup those mornings. The way her phone would buzz with messages and she'd get this particular smile on her face. The kind of smile that wasn't meant for Marcus. The small evidence that accumulated over months. A wine glass left in the guest house with lipstick on it. Scratches on Victor's shirt that looked recent and deliberate. That distinct smell of Victor's expensive cologne mixed with Camilla's expensive perfume in places where they shouldn't have been together. One afternoon, Sophie found Camilla's earring, an expensive diamond thing worth more than Sophie made in a month, on the floor of the guest house near the bed. She stood there holding it, feeling the weight of it in her palm, understanding exactly what it meant. There was no innocent explanation for this. Sophie wasn't judgmental about it. That wasn't her job. But she understood the implications. She understood that a man deserved to know the truth about his wife. She understood that lies, once they start spreading, poison everything they touch. They become foundational. They become the ground that people build their lives on. She also understood something else. The consequences of knowing what she knew. If she told Marcus, she'd become the messenger. And people didn't always appreciate messengers. They sometimes shot them instead. But Sophie believed in something that was becoming increasingly unfashionable. The truth matters. A man has a right to know if his wife is betraying him. A lie that big, that fundamental, that affects the entire foundation of a person's life. That lie shouldn't be allowed to stand. Sophie was naive in that way. She believed in justice. She believed that the truth, if it was told carefully and with evidence, would lead to the right outcome. She didn't yet understand that people in power often didn't want the truth. That truth was often inconvenient for people with resources. That the wealthy had ways of making inconvenient truths go away. She made her decision on a Tuesday. She went online and ordered a mini camera, the kind hidden inside a phone charger, basically invisible, the kind of thing you can get for $30 and have delivered in 2 days. She paid for it with cash at a convenience store's gift card kiosk, leaving no digital trail. When it arrived, she waited for a moment when neither of the Hartleys was home, and she installed it in the guest house. It was angled perfectly at the bed. She tested it on her phone to make sure it worked. The image was clear. The audio was crisp. It would capture everything that happened in that room with brutal, undeniable clarity. Sophie wasn't doing it out of spite. She wasn't planning blackmail, at least, not at first. She was doing it because she believed that evidence mattered, that you couldn't just make accusations without proof, that if Marcus was going to know the truth, he needed to see it himself. She was naive about what happens when you collect evidence of someone's infidelity. She didn't understand that you were creating a weapon, and weapons had a way of being used in ways you didn't intend. For 8 months, she let the camera record. She didn't look at the footage. She knew what it would show. Every time Victor visited, Camilla would shower, change, apply makeup, disappear into the guest house for hours, then shower again and return to her persona for Marcus. The pattern was rhythmic and devastating. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Camilla was fresh from time with Victor. Sophie could tell by the way her hair was slightly messed up, the way her lipstick needed reapplying, that post-intimacy glow. She was fixing her hair in the bathroom mirror, not paying attention to anything else, not expecting anything other than the smooth continuation of her double life. Sophie walked in quietly. She held up a USB drive. "I know what's happening," Sophie said. Her voice was steady, professional. "I have video proof of everything, all of it. 8 months of video. You have exactly 2 choices. 1, you write me a letter of recommendation and help me find another job. A good job, somewhere I can actually build a career. Or 2, Mr. Hartley sees this video." Sophie watched Camilla's face drain of color, watched her hands start to shake. She could see the exact moment when Camilla's brain shifted from, "Who is this woman and how much does she know?" to, "Oh my God, I'm completely exposed." For just a second, Sophie thought maybe Camilla would break down. Maybe she'd cry and admit everything and ask for forgiveness. Maybe she'd confess to Marcus herself and try to fix things through honesty. Sophie didn't understand yet that Camilla was a fundamentally different type of person. Someone for whom honesty wasn't a tool for fixing things. Someone for whom the instinct, when facing exposure, wasn't to confess, but to deflect. Camilla wasn't the kind of person who looked at a problem and thought, "How do I fix this?" or "How do I own up to my mistakes?" She was the kind of person who looked at a problem and asked, "How do I make this disappear completely? How do I erase this threat? How do I turn this around so that I'm not the villain anymore?" She took a deep breath. Her hands stopped shaking. Her face went cold. She was shifting into a different mode, a different persona, the one that knew how to survive. "I'll think about it," Camilla said. "Give me the drive." "I have copies," Sophie said. She was lying. She'd only made 1 copy, kept it in a safety deposit box at a bank downtown. But she thought it would be safer if Camilla believed there were multiple versions floating around. Camilla smiled. It was the coldest smile Sophie had ever seen. It was the smile of someone who just made a decision, who just accepted the reality that this problem, this Sophie problem, had to be handled differently than she'd initially thought. "Okay," Camilla said, "then I guess we'll see." There was something in that smile that should have terrified Sophie. It should have been a warning. It should have made Sophie realize that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. But Sophie didn't understand yet what happened when you threatened people who had resources. What happened when you tried to use the truth as leverage against people who could afford to make truth inconvenient. That evening, Camilla went to Marcus. They were in the living room, the city glittering below them like a promise. Marcus was working on his laptop. Camilla sat down next to him with a look of concern on her face. "We have a problem," she said. Marcus looked up. "What kind of problem?" "The maid," Camilla said. "Sophie, I think she's been stealing from us." Marcus closed his laptop. "Stealing what?" "Jewelry, mostly," Camilla said. She paused, letting that sink in. "Small pieces, but they add up. The diamond earrings from the Tiffany set, that Cartier bracelet I never wear, the Rolex watch from the bedroom, and I don't think she stopped. I think she's still taking things." This was a lie, obviously. Sophie hadn't stolen anything, but lies are interesting things. They're only as powerful as the person delivering them, and Camilla delivered this one with absolute conviction. She'd practiced this speech. She'd rehearsed it in her mind until it sounded natural. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Marcus asked. "I wanted to be sure," Camilla said. "I didn't want to accuse her falsely. But yesterday I actually saw her. She was in the guest house, and she had something in her hand. When she saw me, she quickly put it in her bag. Marcus, I really think we need to call the police." What Camilla didn't tell Marcus was that she'd deliberately planted those items in the guest house. The diamond earrings from her jewelry box, the Cartier bracelet she'd removed from her own wrist, items that could be traced to her, that would make the accusation credible. She'd put them in places where Sophie had access, where they could plausibly be found if someone searched her apartment. She'd thought this through in meticulous detail. She understood that Sophie had threatened her with video evidence, but videos could be disputed. Videos could be said to be doctored, deepfakes, misinterpreted. But if she could frame Sophie for theft first, if she could destroy her credibility, then any accusation Sophie made would be seen as the desperate lies of a criminal trying to deflect from her own guilt. It was brilliant, in a deeply evil sort of way. Marcus didn't question his wife. That's not how successful people operate. Successful people see a threat and they move to neutralize it immediately. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer, Victor, ironically, and told him to draw up formal accusations and get prepared to file a police report. "Do it quietly," Marcus said. "I don't want this becoming public, but I want it handled." He didn't know that the lawyer he was calling was actively betraying him, that Victor had been spending the last 8 months in the guest house with Marcus's wife, that Victor's loyalty to Marcus was a fiction. Victor hung up the phone and sat at his own desk, in his own office, and he made a choice. He could have warned Sophie. He could have told her to run, to get somewhere safe, to prepare for what was coming. He could have shown some basic human decency. He could have admitted the truth to Marcus himself. Instead, he drew up the legal documents exactly as Marcus requested. He moved to help frame an innocent woman in order to cover up his own betrayal. The next morning, when Sophie showed up for her shift, she was intercepted at the door by Marcus and Victor, Marcus's lawyer, who she believed was there to represent the family's interests, and a security guard. "We're filing a formal police report," Marcus said. He wasn't angry. He was ice. "You're being accused of grand theft. You have the right to an attorney. I strongly suggest you hire one." Sophie's mind didn't understand what was happening at first. It took a few seconds to catch up. This didn't make sense. This was backwards. The world had inverted. "What? No, Sophie started. "Don't say another word without a lawyer present," Victor said. He delivered this with the smooth professionalism of someone who'd said it 1,000 times. "Anything you say can and will be used against you," Sophie tried to explain. She tried to tell them about the video, about Camilla's affair with Victor, about the entire setup. But who was she? A domestic worker with no legal representation, no witnesses, no proof on her person, making wild accusations against the word of a billionaire CEO, his wife, and his lawyer. The police arrived. They had a warrant, an actual, legitimate warrant, to search Sophie's apartment. Camilla had been smart about that too. She'd made sure there were proper legal channels, proper procedure, everything official and airtight. She'd gone to a detective she knew, had told a version of the story that sounded completely believable. She had standing, she had resources, she had credibility. Sophie's apartment was turned upside down, every drawer opened, every cabinet searched, every personal item examined. And they found nothing because Sophie had hidden the USB drive in a safety deposit box at a bank downtown. But they didn't need to find it. The absence of stolen goods was explained away. Sophie had already sold them, the accusation went. She'd hidden them elsewhere. She was smarter than they'd given her credit for, which actually made her seem more guilty, not less. If she was smart enough to hide stolen goods, she was smart enough to deny having them. The case moved forward with terrifying speed. Within a week, the police report had been filed. Within 2 weeks, it had leaked to the media. Within 3 weeks, Sophie's name was everywhere online, attached to words like thief and opportunist and ungrateful. Her face was on news broadcasts. Her name was in headlines. Sophie's phone began ringing with calls from people she'd known her whole life. Former friends, colleagues from previous jobs, relatives, neighbors. Everyone had the same question: is it true? And when she tried to explain, when she told them about Camilla and Victor and the video, they looked at her with a particular kind of pity. The pity people reserve for people who are clearly lying about something obvious, who are in denial about their own guilt, who are trying to drag innocent people into their mess to avoid responsibility. Sophie found herself caught in a narrative that was already written. She was the villain of a story that she hadn't chosen to be part of. No matter how she tried to explain, people saw her through the lens of the accusations. She was a thief. She was ungrateful. She was trying to blame rich people for her own crimes. People believed the narrative because the narrative came with resources attached to it. Marcus Hartley, billionaire; Camilla Hartley, society wife. These names meant something. These names implied truth. Sophie's name meant nothing. She tried to find a lawyer who would take the case, but legal representation cost money she didn't have. The public defenders were overworked and skeptical. The lawyers she could afford told her it was a tough case. "You'd need to show that the accusations are definitively false," one lawyer told her. "That requires evidence beyond what you're describing." A video? Even if we got it into court, their team would have it examined. They'd argue about its authenticity. This is a he said, she said case, where she happens to have a billionaire backing her story. More jobs followed the same pattern. Potential employers would Google her name, see the accusation, and politely decline. Sophie found herself unhireable. She was radioactive. No business wanted to be associated with her. Within 3 months, Sophie had become unemployable. She moved into a smaller apartment, then a smaller one, then into a room in a house shared with 4 other people. She found work as a night clerk at a small hotel in Brooklyn, the kind of job that didn't require background checks, that didn't care about her history. Minimum wage, no benefits, no future. And through it all, the USB drive sat in the safety deposit box downtown. Sophie paid the annual fees on the box, $30 a year, money taken from the small amount Marcus had given her as a final paycheck. Money that was supposed to last her through the transition to a new job. Money that now had to stretch to cover everything: food, rent, the bus pass that got her to the hotel where she worked 12-hour shifts for poverty wages. She kept the video. She didn't know why exactly. Revenge seemed pointless. Justice seemed impossible. Her life was still small, still struggling, still marked by the accusation that followed her like a shadow. But the drive represented something: the truth. And in a world where lies had won so completely, where a woman could destroy another woman's life and suffer no consequences, where a man could betray his best friend and keep his job and his money and his position, in that world, the truth felt like a weapon, like insurance, like the one card she hadn't played yet. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment to use it. She didn't know she'd have to wait 5 years. 5 years, 3 months, and 17 days later. Time is a weird thing. It doesn't move at a consistent pace. Sometimes 5 years feels like a lifetime. Sometimes it passes like a blink. For Sophie, the past 5 years had contained both. She was a different person now, harder in some ways, softer in others. She'd survived being destroyed by lies, and that survival had changed her on a fundamental level. She understood things about people and systems and power that she hadn't understood before. She'd learned that the world doesn't care about fairness, that justice isn't something that automatically happens, that sometimes truth loses, and it loses completely. But she'd also learned resilience. She'd learned that survival itself was a form of resistance, that every day she continued to exist, to work, to pay her bills, to hold on to her dignity, that was a victory. Sophie had taken a few classes at community college in the evenings, after her shifts ended at the hotel. It was slow going. She could only afford 1 or 2 classes per semester, and she was constantly exhausted. But she was building toward something, toward a different life, toward a future that didn't involve working minimum wage at a hotel for the rest of her existence. During those 5 years, Sophie had watched Marcus build his empire into something even larger. Knight Industries became the name in tech innovation. Marcus was photographed on magazine covers, Forbes, Fortune, Entrepreneur. He was written about as a visionary. His net worth had doubled, then tripled. His marriage to Camilla looked perfect from the outside. They attended galas together. They were photographed at charity events. Instagram posts showed them smiling at restaurants on vacations. He posted a photo of them in front of the Eiffel Tower, with a caption about how grateful he was for his beautiful wife. Sophie saw that post while she was on a break at the hotel, eating a sandwich in the back room. She felt something crack inside her chest. To anyone looking at Marcus Hartley, he was winning. The thing was, he wasn't. The doubt had started small. That chance encounter on a rainy street in Brooklyn where he'd thought he saw Sophie. It had grown over time, fed by small moments where his brain would whisper to him, "What if you got that wrong? What if you didn't investigate properly? What if you just accepted your wife's story without questioning it?" These whispers had accumulated until they became a noise he couldn't ignore. It had started with a conversation with a business associate who'd mentioned that he'd seen Sophie's name in a news article about workers' rights. The article didn't mention the theft case. It just mentioned that there was a woman named Sophie Chen advocating for protections for domestic workers. And Marcus had wondered, is it the same Sophie? What is she doing now? Then he'd run into an old acquaintance at a restaurant, and that acquaintance had mentioned something casual, how she'd seen Sophie working at a hotel in Brooklyn. Just a passing comment. But it had lodged in Marcus's brain. Marcus had tried not to think about it. He tried to maintain the narrative that he'd done the right thing, that Sophie had been guilty, that the case had been handled appropriately. But the narrative wasn't holding anymore. On a Tuesday evening, 5 years after firing Sophie, Marcus was in his home office, going through old files. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was just searching, looking for something to settle the unease in his chest, looking for evidence that he'd done the right thing. He pulled up the police report from the theft investigation. He read through it carefully for the first time since it had been filed. Before, he'd just accepted it. But now, 5 years later, with doubt creeping through his mind, he actually read the words. The more he read, the more uncomfortable he became. There were inconsistencies in the timeline. The evidence seemed rushed. The investigation appeared to have wrapped up suspiciously quickly, and when he really looked at it, he realized that nobody had actually found Sophie in possession of stolen goods. They'd searched her apartment and found nothing. They'd searched her workplace, her car, her safe deposit box, and found nothing. How did they make a theft case stick with no actual stolen property? They didn't, which meant either the police report was sloppy or something else was going on. Marcus sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. His hands were shaking slightly. He understood why. Deep down, in the part of his mind that he'd been successfully suppressing for 5 years, he knew exactly why. Because somewhere in his subconscious, he'd always known that something didn't add up. Because he'd wanted to believe his wife's story so badly that he'd accepted it without real investigation. Because he'd let anger and wounded pride override his instinct for truth. He'd destroyed an innocent woman. That realization hit him like a physical blow. Marcus made a decision that night. He couldn't confront Camilla. He couldn't ask her questions. Because if she knew he was doubting the narrative, she'd have time to prepare, to construct new lies, to bury whatever truth still existed. He picked up his phone and called a private investigator he knew. Someone good, someone discreet. Her name was Diana Walsh, and she had a reputation for finding things that people wanted to stay hidden. "I need you to do something for me," Marcus said, "and I need you to be absolutely quiet about it. No reports to my office, no emails, just phone calls to this number." "What do you need?" Diana asked. "I need you to find someone," Marcus said. "A woman named Sophie Chen. She used to work for me. She was accused of stealing from me about 5 years ago. I need to know where she is now, what she's doing, everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You want me to investigate the case against her?" Diana asked carefully. "I want you to find her," Marcus said, "and I want you to investigate everything about it. The accusations, the police report, all of it." "This is going to take time," Diana said, "and it's not going to be cheap." "I don't care about either of those things," Marcus said. "Take your time. I'm not in a rush." He was lying. He absolutely was in a rush. Diana showed up at Marcus's office on a Friday afternoon with a file folder and a look on her face that suggested she'd found something interesting. "Your former employee is working as a night clerk at the Riverside Hotel in Brooklyn," Diana said, laying a photograph on his desk. It showed Sophie behind a hotel front desk, looking tired and thin. She looked like someone who'd been worn down by 5 years of struggle. She's paid her taxes consistently, never missed a payment, and she's maintained a safety deposit box at a bank downtown. "A safety deposit box?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," Diana said. "That's the interesting part. I couldn't find out what's in it, obviously. That's private. But I did find something else." Diana laid photographs on Marcus's desk, one after another. They were security footage stills, hotel surveillance from high-end properties across Manhattan. And in every single one, there was Victor. Victor checking into a hotel with a woman. The woman wasn't Camilla in some of the photos, but in a significant number of them, it absolutely was. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Victor Sokolov appears to be having an affair," Diana said matter-of-factly. "With your wife, based on the frequency and duration of their hotel visits. I have receipts, hotel records, credit card statements, everything documented." The affair appears to have been ongoing for at least the past 2 years, possibly longer. In fact, based on the hotel records I found, I believe it's been going on much longer than that. Diana pulled out another stack of documents. I tracked backward through the records. The affair goes back years, at least to the time when Sophie Chen was accused of theft. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. "There's more," Diana continued. "I tracked the history of the theft accusation. I looked into how the case was built, and I found something that doesn't make sense." She laid out the police reports, the investigation details, the evidence logs with careful precision. "There's no chain of custody on the allegedly stolen items," Diana explained. "They searched her apartment and found nothing. They never actually caught her with the stolen goods. The case was built entirely on your wife's accusation and your legal counsel's willingness to press charges. In most jurisdictions, that's not enough for a conviction. The fact that it moved forward as quickly as it did suggests that either the process was compromised or there never was any theft in the first place." Diana paused, letting that sink in. "I interviewed some of the original detectives," she continued. "They're retired now, so they're willing to talk. They said the case felt wrong from the start. No evidence, no motive that made sense. But the accusation came from a billionaire's wife, and that carried weight. The wheels got set in motion, and by the time anyone questioned whether they should have, the damage was done." Marcus stared at the documents. His mind was struggling to process what he was hearing. "I also pulled the security footage from your guest house," Diana said. "Your wife's accusation was that Sophie had stolen items while she was in the guest house. The guest house has exterior security cameras. In all of this footage, over the entire period we examined, Sophie Chen never goes into the guest house at times when your wife said this allegedly happened. In fact, Sophie rarely goes into the guest house at all. The person who's in that guest house regularly? Victor Sokolov." Marcus stared at the images. In the photographs, he could see Victor entering and leaving the guest house at odd hours. In several of them, Camilla was visible just before or just after Victor's arrivals. "I need you to find her," Marcus said quietly. "Sophie, I need to talk to her. She works nights," Diana said. "You could find her at the hotel most evenings. But Mr. Hartley? Based on what I've found, I think you should know that she might not be happy to see you. You got her fired. You got her publicly accused. From her perspective, you destroyed her life." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "I did do that, didn't I?" He stood up and walked to the window of his office. From this height, the city spread out below him looked like something he'd built, like something he owned. But looking at it now, all he could think about was Sophie, working a night shift at a hotel in Brooklyn, sleeping in a shared room with 4 other people, paying $30 a year to keep a safety deposit box locked away, all because he hadn't asked questions, because he'd let his wife tell him a story and he'd accepted it without investigation. "Send me everything you have," Marcus said, "and I mean everything, every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. Print it out. Make it physical. I need to see it all." Marcus showed up at the Riverside Hotel in Brooklyn on a Wednesday evening. The hotel was the kind of place where people stayed when they couldn't afford anything better. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. The walls were painted a color that might have been beige or might have been tan. The light was fluorescent and slightly too bright, the kind of light that made everything look tired. Sophie was behind the front desk, processing a check-in for a businessman who looked equally tired. She was wearing the hotel uniform, a polo shirt with the hotel logo embroidered on it. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked smaller than Marcus remembered, worn down by the burden of carrying lies that weren't hers. When she looked up and saw him, her entire body went rigid. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was like they'd both been frozen in time by the shock of this encounter. "Oh my God," Sophie whispered. "Sophie," Marcus said, "I need to talk to you, please." Sophie's instinct was to say no, to tell him to leave, to pretend this conversation wasn't happening. But something in his face, something that looked like genuine horror at what he'd done, made her pause. "My break is in 10 minutes, she finally said. Her voice was careful, measured, like she was speaking to someone dangerous, out back. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Marcus's life. He waited in the dingy lobby, watching Sophie check in 2 more guests, watching her operate with a kind of careful professionalism that suggested she'd learned to separate her emotions from her work. She was a functioning person. She was surviving. But there was something hollow in it. 10 minutes later, they stood in the alley behind the hotel. The Brooklyn evening was cool, and the sound of traffic from the main street was a constant background hum. The alley smelled like garbage and the accumulated grime of urban life. "I didn't send you those stolen goods," Sophie said. Not a question, a statement. She was starting this conversation where it needed to start, with the fundamental truth. "No," Marcus confirmed. "You didn't." "I tried to tell you what really happened," Sophie said. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was 5 years of anger and pain and frustration. "I tried to explain about Camilla and Victor, but you didn't want to hear it." "I know," Marcus said, "and I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry." Sophie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sorry doesn't give me back 5 years. Sorry doesn't fix my reputation. Sorry doesn't undo the fact that I became unemployable because you and your wife decided to lie about me." "I know," Marcus said again, and the repetition of those words, "I know, I know, I know," seemed to make it real. He was acknowledging what he'd done, not excusing it, not minimizing it, just acknowledging it. "That's why I'm here," Marcus continued, "because I need to fix this, or at least start to." "How do you fix something like this?" Sophie asked. There was genuine curiosity in her voice, mixed with skepticism. "You can't undestroy someone's life." "No," Marcus agreed, "but I can start by telling the truth. I can start by investigating what actually happened. I can start by listening to you." Sophie was quiet for a long moment. She was evaluating him, trying to determine if this was real or if it was another trick, another layer of deception. "Because you said you had video proof," Marcus finally said. "Do you still have it?" Sophie's expression shifted. Caution crossed her face. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I need to see it," Marcus said. "Because I need to know the truth. Because I can't fix anything if I don't actually know what happened. And because I need to understand what I did to you. All of it." Sophie studied him for a long time. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a key, an old-fashioned key to a safety deposit box. "If I show you this," Sophie said, You need to understand something. I've kept this safe for 5 years. It's my insurance. It's the one thing I have that proves I wasn't lying. If I give it to you, if I let you see what's in that box, I'm putting myself at your mercy. I'm trusting that you're not going to try to bury it or make it disappear. I'm not, Marcus said. I promise you, I'm not. Sophie looked at him for another long moment. Then she handed him the key. The First Manhattan Bank, she said. Downtown, box 4127. The video is in there. Everything is in there. An hour later, Marcus was sitting in a private room at the bank, holding a USB drive in his hands. The safety deposit box had contained nothing but the drive and some old letters. Sophie had apparently kept it minimal, understanding that if anyone ever did search for her valuables, they'd be looking for jewelry or cash, not documents. But the drive represented her only insurance policy against the world that had stolen everything else from her. Marcus held it in his hand, and for a moment, he couldn't make himself put it in the laptop. Because once he watched this video, once he saw the proof of his wife's betrayal, once he saw Victor in that guest house with Camilla, there would be no going back. The narrative he'd constructed would be destroyed. His marriage would be destroyed. His image of himself would be destroyed. But he had to know. He hit play. He watched 40 minutes of video. His wife with his best friend. Again and again. The guest house. His own office. Moments of genuine intimacy that told him this wasn't just a fling. This was real. This was an actual affair, not a moment of weakness. This was a relationship. In one segment, Camilla and Victor were lying in bed in the guest house, and Camilla was laughing at something Victor had said. She looked happy. Genuinely happy. In a way that Marcus realized he'd never seen her look in their entire marriage. She looked like a person who was exactly where she wanted to be, with exactly who she wanted to be with. By the time the video ended, Marcus felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until it stopped beating. 5 years. 5 years of his life built on lies. Every business decision he'd made while thinking the home front was stable. Every moment of pride in his marriage, in his family structure, all of it poisoned by deception. And underneath all of that, underneath the anger and the betrayal, was the recognition of what he'd done to an innocent woman to cover up his wife's lies. He'd destroyed her. He'd done it without hesitation, without investigation, without even stopping to question whether the accusations were true. Marcus left the bank and went straight to his office. It was nearly midnight, but Victor was there, working late, which seemed to be his permanent state these days. He looked up when Marcus walked in, and something in Marcus's face made him immediately stand up. "We need to talk," Marcus said. "About what?" Victor asked. But he already knew. Marcus could see it in his face, the moment when Victor realized that the secret was no longer secret. Marcus played the video on his laptop. He turned the screen so Victor could see. He didn't say anything. He just let Victor watch. Victor watched it for approximately 20 seconds before he turned away. His face had gone pale. His hands were shaking. "Marcus, I can explain," Victor started. "No, you can't," Marcus said. His voice was very calm, very quiet, very controlled. "There's nothing to explain. It's all right there. Every lie, every moment of betrayal." Victor tried anyway. He gave Marcus the usual excuses. "It just happened. She came on to me. It didn't mean anything." All the standard things that men say when they're caught, none of which actually mean anything. Victor was sweating now. His carefully constructed European sophistication was cracking. He looked suddenly young and scared and very human. "She's the one who framed Sophie," Marcus said. "You helped her. You drew up the legal documents. You helped press charges against an innocent woman to cover up your affair." "I didn't," Victor started. "You did," Marcus said. "You helped destroy an innocent woman's life to protect yours. Now, get out of my office." Victor just left. The sound of his shoes on the marble floor was the only goodbye Marcus got. Marcus went home to the penthouse. Camilla was in the bedroom, getting ready for bed. She was in that vulnerable state where she had no makeup on, where she was just a person instead of a carefully constructed persona. "We need to talk," Marcus said. Camilla turned and her face showed confusion, then concern. "What's wrong? You look—" "I know everything," Marcus said. "About you and Victor, about Sophie, about all of it." The color drained from Camilla's face, like someone had pulled a plug. She tried denial first. "That's insane. You're completely wrong." Then explanation. "It just happened. We didn't plan it." Then shifting into victim mode. "He came on to me. I was lonely. You were always working." Then seduction. She moved closer to him, trying to use the thing that had always worked before. "Marcus, please. You're overreacting. People make mistakes. We can work through this." Marcus stepped back. "Don't," he said. "Just don't. Not this time." He pulled out an envelope. Inside were divorce papers, already signed, already ready. All Camilla had to do was add her signature. "You're going to sign these," Marcus said. "Quietly, no fight, no public mess. You take the settlement and you move on with your life." Camilla stared at the papers like they were written in a language she didn't understand. "What if I refuse?" she asked. "Then I don't sign them," Marcus said. "And I release everything. The videos, the financial records, the messages, the hotel receipts, all of it. I give it to every media outlet in the country. You get destroyed, and you don't even get paid for it." Marcus watched Camilla do the math in her head, watched her calculate which option hurt less, watched her understand that she had no leverage here. "Sign the papers," he said. Camilla signed the papers. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. The next morning, Marcus called his legal team. "I want the original theft charges against Sophie Chen dropped," he said. "I want the police report amended. I want her record cleared, and I want it done today." His lawyers tried to explain the complications. They didn't want to do this. They understood what this meant. It meant admitting that their client had framed an innocent woman. It meant exposing the Hartley family to legal liability. It meant creating a narrative in which Marcus Hartley had made a massive mistake. "We need to file motions. We need to work with the DA's office. We need to—" "I don't care about the process," Marcus interrupted. "Make it happen. Use whatever resources you need to use. I want it done before the end of business today. Mr. Hartley, there could be legal consequences for you." "I don't care," Marcus said. "Do it." It happened. Then Marcus issued a public statement, released to every major news outlet simultaneously, with court documents showing that the charges against Sophie Chen had been dropped and her record expunged. He said, "I accept full responsibility for allowing false accusations to proceed without proper investigation. I failed in my duty to seek the truth. I failed to protect an innocent person." Within hours, people started connecting dots. Someone found the court records. Someone dug up the original police report. Someone tracked down a retired detective willing to talk about how wrong the case had felt from the beginning. The real story spread across social media like a virus. Hartley's CEO admits wrongdoing, Maid framed for wife's affair. From accused to vindicated, the 5-year fight for justice. Billionaire destroyed innocent worker to cover up infidelity. Camilla Hartley's life imploded with the precision of a controlled demolition. Within hours, she stopped being a person and became a symbol of betrayal and cruelty. Her social circle ghosted her simultaneously. Her Instagram profile became a graveyard of comments, thousands of them, each one angry. Within a week, she'd deleted the account, but the screenshots were already archived. Charity organizations distanced themselves. Restaurants claimed to be fully booked. Designer boutiques stopped calling. Camilla tried reaching out to her friends. They didn't respond. By the end of the second week, she understood that she was radioactive. There was no recovery. Within a month, she'd left Manhattan. She moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, somewhere far enough away that nobody would recognize her. She got a small apartment and a job at a department store. She became invisible in a way that suited her punishment. She'd earned that invisibility. Victor's destruction happened faster and with more finality than Camilla's. The legal community in Manhattan is small. Word travels fast. By the time Victor tried to reach out to clients or other lawyers about finding new work, everyone already knew what had happened. Everyone already knew that he betrayed his closest friend. Everyone already knew that he was willing to help cover up an affair by framing an innocent woman. No law firm would touch him. His phone calls went unanswered. His emails were ignored. His reputation didn't just take a hit, it evaporated completely. It was replaced with a single narrative. Viktor Sokolov is an untrustworthy man who betrayed his client and his friend, and helped frame an innocent woman. That narrative followed him everywhere. It was searchable. It was permanent. It was the first thing that came up when anyone Googled his name. Within 3 months, Viktor Sokolov had effectively disappeared from professional life in America. He moved back to Europe, Romania specifically. From what people heard through the grapevine, he was working at a small legal firm in Bucharest, handling cases that barely paid his rent. Real estate disputes, small contract disagreements. The kind of work that didn't require complex thinking or high-level skills. The fall from billionaire adjacent to struggling European lawyer was complete and total. He'd earned that fall too. Sophie didn't celebrate when the truth came out. When Marcus offered financial compensation, enough to buy her an apartment and pay for college, Sophie didn't immediately accept. She sat with the offer for a week. Finally, she called Marcus. "I'll accept," she said, "but I want my name cleared publicly. I want you to issue a statement that specifically says I was innocent. And I want you to set up a fund for other domestic workers who've been wrongfully accused." Marcus agreed. 6 months later, Sophie was enrolled full-time at Columbia University, studying law. She was working at a nonprofit advocating for workers' rights. She had survived. She had won by refusing to let them define her future. The truth had mattered. It had just taken 5 years to find its way into the light. For Marcus Hartley, redemption wasn't peace, it was penance. Every headline, every whisper in business circles, every awkward silence at board meetings reminded him that even visionaries can destroy lives when they stop asking questions. Knight Industries survived the scandal, but the glow was gone. His face no longer appeared under the word genius. Now it came with flawed, but human. He could live with that. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus would find himself standing by the window of his penthouse, now empty, stripped of Camilla's art, her perfumes, her staged perfection. The city lights stretched endlessly, indifferent to one man's fall and rise. He didn't miss her. What haunted him was the look in Sophie's eyes when she handed him that key. Not anger, not triumph, but exhaustion. A kind of moral fatigue that comes from fighting alone for too long. He funded the foundation she demanded, the Chen Initiative, and watched it grow faster than he'd expected. Within months, it was helping wrongfully accused workers, providing legal aid, protection, and dignity. Sophie had turned her pain into purpose. Marcus donated anonymously at first, then publicly. It wasn't charity, it was accountability. One autumn afternoon, they met again, not as employer and maid, not even as victim and perpetrator, but as two people bound by the truth that had nearly destroyed them both. They stood in the offices of the Chen Initiative, surrounded by case files of people Sophie was helping. "You did the right thing," Sophie said. Not quite forgiveness, more like witnessing, confirmation that his actions aligned with what needed to happen. "Too late," he replied. "Better late than never," she answered. It was an honest exchange. Sophie wasn't absolving him. She wasn't suggesting that his public admission had somehow balanced the scales. 5 years of her life remained gone. The lost opportunities, the damaged reputation, the years of community college classes squeezed into exhaustion between night shifts. The foundation couldn't restore any of that. But as Marcus looked at the files on the desks, people whose lives were being protected, whose truths were being documented, whose dignity was being restored, he understood something. Redemption wasn't about feeling better. It was about ensuring that the same machinery of injustice couldn't be deployed against others with the same ease. "Do you think this will hold?" Sophie asked carefully. She was asking something deeper than the question's surface. "Do you think you'll maintain this commitment? Or will powerful people like you eventually convince yourselves to move on, to let this fade when the headlines die down?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "I have to try to believe it will. But I also know people like me. I know how easy it is to convince yourself that you've done enough, that you've paid your debt." "That's the only honest thing you could have said," Sophie replied. They stood together in silence, two survivors of a truth that had nearly destroyed them both. Not reconciled exactly, not healed, but witnessing each other's existence in a way that acknowledged what had actually happened and what actually remained. For the first time in 5 years, Marcus Hartley breathed freely. Not like a man who'd won, but like one who'd finally stopped lying to himself. The penthouse still stood above the city. Knight Industries still existed. His name still appeared in business magazines. But none of it mattered the way it once had. The scorecard had changed. Winning now meant something different. It meant showing up. It meant staying accountable. It meant accepting that some damage never fully heals. Sophie walked back to the hotel that night with something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Not closure, but forward movement. The foundation would help dozens more people. The video had been deleted, no longer needed as insurance. She'd kept the key only as a reminder of what truth cost and what it was worth. And in the city below, the lights continued to glitter indifferently, bearing witness to the ordinary miracles of people trying to do better than they had before.